Well, it's just a little bit after 7. I'm sure a few more people will probably join us in the time that I'm talking here, but that's okay. So I want to welcome everyone to this evening's program on forest bathing with Jane Dobson. This is going to be an hour long-ish presentation this evening. I know Jane we were just chatting about getting out and doing some winter forest bathing and some of the challenges that the deeper snow might bring. Yeah, more snow coming. So we're just kind of enjoying some of the end of winter here. So to start things off, I'd like to thank you all for attending this evening's webinar through Mohonk Preserve. It's on DIY forest bathing. So my name is Lauren Bohr. I am the Education Outreach Coordinator at Mohonk Preserve, and I'm going to be monitoring and facilitating this presentation this evening. Before I introduce Jane, I just have a few reminders for everyone attending this evening. If you could mute your audio for us and also turn off your video. Sometimes that can be a little distracting during our presentation. It's going to just help prevent any distractions for the presenter and the audience. If you do have any questions for Jane, you can use the chat box. There will probably be points throughout this presentation for questions to be answered. So we can take a pause, but definitely at the end of the program, we'll have a time for some Q&A. So this presentation is going to be recorded. So if for any reason you missed part of it or you're someone who's actually signed up but not attending right now, this is going to be recorded along with the chat and the conversation to share with everyone online. So I just ask that you're going to be mindful and respectful during the presentation and in the chat box, of course. And this will be made available on the Mohonk Preserve website and also on our Facebook page. So if you haven't liked us on Facebook, please. So our presenter this evening is Jane Dobson. Jane is a certified mindful nature guide and founder of Mind the Forest. She's certified through Kripalu's School of Mindful Outdoor Leadership and currently in training with the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy. Through her group, Mind the Forest, she partners with the Preserve to offer forest bathing programs to its members and the public. Mind the Forest also provides programs at Minnewaska State Park Preserve, as well as private corporate retreats. She's a New York State licensed hiking guide and a certified yoga instructor. So in addition to all of that and running Mind the Forest, she's also a practicing attorney. So this spring and summer, Jane will be offering forest bathing classes at Mohonk Preserve. These are in-person classes. Registration is currently open for the spring series of classes. They'll be meeting on the first Saturday of each month, starting in March, which is just a few weeks away. And Jane will guide you through the practice of forest bathing in a 2-hour-long program. Space is limited for these classes for a couple of reasons. One, due to COVID, we like to keep all of our in-person public programs to 10 people. Also, it just goes better. As Jane, I'm sure will talk about, smaller groups is just better for forest bathing. So if you miss out on the opportunity to have an in-person experience this spring or summer, you're going to get to know some of the basics with Jane. We'll just get right into this. I know there's a couple other people who have been joining us. So without further ado, here is Jane Dobson, and she's going to be presenting on forest bathing. So I am going to mute myself, Jane, and I'll let you take right on over.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lauren, and thanks for that introduction. And definitely, welcome to everybody joining tonight. I'm really happy to be part of the program tonight. I love the Preserve. I also am, deeply passionate about the importance of nature connection in our lives. So this is a topic that's very near and dear to me. About a decade ago, I'd say, forest bathing was relatively unknown in the United States and actually much of the world. But as a practice, it's really taken hold globally over the last, number of years as a practice that's really essential to our well-being, and also a practice that's really critical to our role as caretakers of the earth. So today we're going to discuss forest bathing as a practice that each of us, to some extent, can cultivate, individually. We'll focus on these topics tonight, forest bathing, what it is, what it isn't, a little bit about the history and the science behind forest bathing. We'll discuss, beyond the science, more than just the health information. And then we have a number of DIY thoughts for developing or cultivating a personal practice. So I like to think about, or start discussing what forest bathing is, really by talking about what it's not. So the gentleman who really brought forest bathing to the United States is a gentleman, Amos Clifford. He's also the founder of the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy. And he shares how he often meets people who tell him, forest bathing, I've been doing that, my whole life. And these are typically, real outdoor enthusiasts. These are people who are avid hikers, they're mountain climbers, they're rock climbers, they're walkers, joggers, and they are connected to nature in that way. And while some of them are definitely engaged in mindful nature time or forest bathing, but the reality is that probably for most of them, they're actually not forest bathing as we're going to discuss it here today, because it's a different way of being outside. So starting with what it isn't, it's not hiking. It's not about, getting to the top of the mountain or just getting to the waterfall. It's not exercise. In fact, we don't typically go very far at all on a forest bathing walk. It's not meditation or outdoor yoga, although it's definitely influenced by those other, mindfulness practices. And, it's not a nature identification walk. The pace is, and actually I just want to see on my screen here, I think I'm seeing, I just want to move the gallery. The pace is slow in forest bathing. The destination is really here, not there. And naturalist knowledge is great. I wish I had more of it. I'm trying to develop more of it. I think it helps build a relationship with the natural world. But really on a forest bathing walk, we're actually trying to get out of our thinking minds. That's where we spend most of our time. And forest bathing is far more sensory. It's less analytical, what neuroscientists would call, bottom up instead of top down. So we really give our attention to our senses when we're forest bathing. And by senses, I mean, sight, sound, smell, touch, taste, and, even, beyond the five senses, your imaginal senses, your imagination senses, your body awareness senses. And with our focus on what we are sensing, we can't mentally be elsewhere. So it places us right in the present moment. And that really is, what we hope to achieve when we're forest bathing. And that really opens us up, to nature's healing properties. On a larger level, and this is a an area of forest bathing that is, I think, of personal importance to me. And I think really the critical aspect of it is that it's really looking to restore a healthy relationship between us and the natural world, or what I'll call the more than human world tonight. So here the focus is really more on, connection and relationship, connecting with ourselves, connecting with others, and connecting with the more than human world. And it's based on this very important premise that nature connection is essential to our sense of wholeness and our sense of well-being. And that's really what we'll go through, this evening. It makes sense, this idea of restoring this connection, that our wholeness depends on that, because, we've evolved from the natural world as a species. In fact, we've spent, 99.9% of our time as a species living in the natural world. So that's the environment that we're naturally adapted to. This assumes that, it was only with the Industrial Revolution, let's say, that you really kind of have people moving out of natural environments into urban environments. But our evolution was in a very dynamic way with the earth. So our ancestors, they rose with the sun. They went to bed when the sun set. And they were attuned, their lives were attuned, to the seasons, plants, animals, the elements, the contours of the land that they lived on. In other words, we really are hardwired with the natural world, and our genes really evolved in this setting. And that's why that reconnection, that remembering becomes so important. But what we've seen is that there's really kind of been a migration indoors in many ways. In fact, you could even say that humans have become, sort of domesticated, that, we've kind of insulated ourselves indoors and have really left this outdoor environment altogether, kind of sealed ourselves off from it. And there's a couple of, interesting, thoughts on, like, what are those barriers? Like, why is that happening? And one on the right-hand side of this wall on this slide here is just urbanization. I mean, there's been an increasing movement to urban centers, so much so that in 2008, the World Health Organization, found for the first time that the majority of humans now live in urban environments, making us an urban species. There's modern comforts. We have created comfortable homes. And in many ways, they've allowed us to be sealed off from our natural environments. Technology, there's clearly a saturation of technology in our lives. And while it certainly has many, many benefits, like, for instance, we're able to have this discussion tonight, it really has in many ways usurped direct experience, for virtual experience. And that is very much at the heart of forest bathing, the need for the direct experience for our authentic lives. And lastly, I put down fear as a barrier from us continuing to have a relationship with the more than human world. Because in many ways, nature's kind of been discussed as a dangerous place for people. There's ticks and mosquitoes and the possibility of disease, the possibility of injuries. We've kind of adopted a little bit of a cultural approach that's more like a museum. You can look, but you can't touch. Richard Louv, in his book, the Nature Deficit Disorder, describes this great chapter where he talks about, how kids can't even build tree forts anymore, like this, historical kind of rite of passage, but it's too dangerous for children to build tree forts anymore. So many communities have banned tree forts as a type of object that you can have on your property. So those barriers are pretty significant because they've put us in this highly, urbanized and artificial environment. And when we inhabit that, it really puts us in a stress state. So this is my picture of a stress state. It's pretty harried. It's sort of frenetic. It doesn't feel very peaceful or relaxing. And yet, more and more, this is the environment we're spending the bulk of our time in. Just wanted to share a couple of the statistics on this. The EPA estimates that the average American spends 93% of their time indoors or in automobiles. CNN's reported that Americans now spend about 11 hours a day in front of a screen of some type, your phone, a tablet, computer, TV. And this is not just unique, to the United States, to America. In the UK, a statistic came out a few years ago that kids in the UK actually are out in nature or outside less than the time prison inmates go outside. So it's increasingly concerning. And in fact, we see that the World Health Organization has found that non-communicable diseases or lifestyle diseases now account, for 50% of premature deaths in the developed world. So these are diseases that are the direct result of stress, poor diet, lack of exercise. And much of that, I think, is a result of being disconnected from nature. So that really brings us a little bit to why forest bathing took hold over the last number of years. Forest bathing is actually not an ancient practice. It's a Japanese practice called Shinrin-yoku, which translates in English to forest bath. And this was developed in Japan in the 80s in response to a health crisis. And it was a health crisis brought on by this mass urbanization and a culture of extreme stress. In the early 80s, Japan was really transitioning to a tech-based economy, and people were spending more and more time inside and more time in front of screens. And what the government noticed is that there was this uptick in illness and disease and in cancers. And so they started forest bathing as a government-sanctioned preventative health initiative. And they decided upon that by collecting a lot of research and data around the benefits of spending time in nature. But I think, for me, what was interesting about the history or its origin coming out of Japan is this idea why'd they call it a forest bath? Why did they go there? And it was interesting because the Japanese discovered that trees keep themselves healthy by showering themselves in what are called phytoncides. And these are oils that we can't even see that are emitted into the atmosphere. They're antibacterial and antifungal. And if a tree is being attacked by fungi, it will diffuse these phytoncides into the air around it. And then the phytoncides will kill the fungi or disease. But the amazing part of the story was that the research showed that humans because we evolved in the natural environment, that we have a similar reaction to phytoncides. So when we're out in a forested environment and in the presence of these phytoncides that are emitted, they actually produce what are called NK cells in our bodies, or these are called natural killer cells. And these cells roam our body looking for other cells that are stressed, that are like overworked, getting ill, stressed, and they preventatively kill those stressed cells. So we're not targeting a specific disease. This is really preventative health medicine. And that's really where the term forest bath or forest bathing came from, this idea of showering in these health benefits of the natural environment. So the science behind this is really, I think, what has propelled forest bathing as a movement, because it really is an evidence-based practice. There's real and measurable data about its health benefits for you. I want to share a little bit about that. One of the early on research studies, also in Japan, took two groups. One group did a 45-minute walk in the forest, and another control group did a 45-minute walk in an indoor laboratory. And the physical benefits were significant. The group that walked in the forest showed a 12% decrease in the stress hormone cortisol, a 1.4% decrease in their blood pressure, their heart rate decreased by 6%, and their fight or flight response, our sympathetic nervous system, that kind of is great if we need to ward off a lion attack or something, but we really don't want it on a day-by-day basis all the time, that dropped by 7%. So even after small periods of time in nature, we can achieve some real health benefits. And it's more than just the physical benefits. Really, you are healthier and happier with time spent in nature. So we look at the mental health benefits, elevated mood, improved focus, reduced anxiety. Stanford University has done a great study on this idea that, or this research, I should say, that nature connection significantly decreases your mind's tendency to dwell in these ruminative thoughts, ruminate about things in the past or the future. So how much time do you really need? Have we quantified that? So the Wall Street Journal, maybe some folks saw it just last week, February 14th, they issued an article, is 2 hours outdoors the new 10,000 steps? By 10,000 steps, that's all those apps that we have for measuring how many steps you take each day, because 10,000 was targeted as your ideal optimal health number. Well, they're kind of doing the same thing with time in nature now. And in fact, apps are being developed to track our time spent outdoors, just like we're tracking the number of steps we take each week. And what the data shows is that you need a minimum of 2 hours a week for good health and well-being. And anything less than 2 hours doesn't really make a difference. It might be enjoyable and everything, right? But it's not making a health difference. The sweet spot is really 3 to 5 hours a week. But so when we look at time in nature and its health benefits, we really do see this as a wellness practice. But it's much, much more than just the science. certainly Shinrin-yoku or forest bathing, as we've talked about it, dating back only to the 80s in Japan, is relatively recent. But the idea of turning to nature, for its healing properties is as old as it gets, right? All cultures for all time have looked to nature for its energies and its healing properties. I like this quote by Thoreau, somebody close to us in this neck of the woods, really. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach. So Thoreau is talking about more than physical or mental health benefits that come from time in nature. And forest bathing has really evolved into two schools of thought around this premise. In the middle bubble here, science, Shinrin-yoku, that's really the Japanese form of forest bathing. It's extremely science-based and it is focused on health benefits. If you go take a forest walk in Japan, you're going to go on a designated trail. Before you start your walk, they're going to measure, some key physiological data from you, and then they can compare it when you come off of the walk with where your body is post-walk. In the US, the evolution of forest bathing is a little bit broader. And I really put this in the call to action that we received with Richard Louv when he coined the term nature deficit disorder. And he really framed this as, sort of a public health issue and a cultural issue. That this unquestioning saturation and integration of technology in our lives to the exclusion of time spent in nature was having detrimental cultural impacts, for all persons and in particular for our children. So in the US, the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy, they really look at these more subtle aspects in the broader circle on this slide. They're really looking at, fostering a sense of personal wholeness and authenticity by connecting, remembering our natural environment, a spirituality that allows us or focuses on connecting to something that's larger than ourselves, a journey, to our individual sense of wholeness and purpose. This idea of reciprocity with the natural world, that we're not just going to see nature as a resource, right, that we can extract things from, but that we're building a relationship with the more than human world. And all relationships are really based on reciprocity. So here, in this expanded view of forest bathing, that the ANFT really has embedded here in the United States, for instance, the focus is really more on connection and relationship. So I'm going to just pause there for a moment before we go into, a little bit of some DIY thoughts on practice, and just see if there are any comments or questions that people have that you can put through the chat or I guess by unmuting yourself.
Yeah, we have a couple of really great comments here. Tony has been commenting. Kind of feels that the whole forest bathing concept is very Buddhist. And he's also mentioned that he's read some data that because we spend so much time in a natural world, often indoor and looking at a screen, that more and more humans are becoming nearsighted at a faster trend rate across all age groups. Great quote from John Muir. I only went out for a walk and finally concluded to stay out till sundown. For going out, I found I was really going in. Yeah, a comment about rocking horses used to be the most dangerous toy in America. Oh, and then Terry has a good one. You can listen to the sound of forest from several places around the world. So there's she has a website, timberfestival.org.uk. So yeah, and Tony, of course, was looking at a video clip on repeat just to listen for the wind there. And here's a question from Scott. Does one have to move, or can one simply sit still in a forest setting?
So I want to respond to a couple of those, and thanks for sharing those comments, and would love to circulate the site about hearing the sounds of the forest, in different places around the world. That sounds really beautiful. The John Muir quote, absolutely one of my favorites as well. And thank you for sharing that. So you, I would say to answer, can you sit or move slowly? It's both. And we'll talk a little bit about, both sitting quietly or moving, slowly. And I think the main point there, though, is that the pace is slow. So it is all about downshifting. It's all about going slowly so that you can notice things, so that you are more in touch, with your senses and awareness. And then I did want to mention about the eyesight comment. Yeah, that's really very interesting. I think there's been some studies out of Singapore as well, because even though Singapore is a super green country, it's sort of known for that. But the reality is that many children in particular live in these very, very, very high rises. And while they're almost like all glass, they don't necessarily get to spend time alone, the kids, in these park spaces, because they live in these urban high rises. And I had read an article about the incidence of, impaired sight, and the need for eyeglasses at very young ages, because the retina or something in your retina is not developing the same way. Even the same with our feet, right? We don't really walk barefoot anymore. We have all these soft, really great sneakers now, but actually there's a physiological change that's happening with some of our bone structure on our feet, because our ancestors were not wearing, eye clouds out there in the forest. So it does have an evolutionary effect for sure.
Yeah, we have, there's just a couple more in here. Maribel says, I'm curious about more science-based healing properties, the insights of forest bathing.
I think that what I could do to answer that question is I could actually, for folks who are interested, maybe send around some resources, following. But because there's such a huge amount of research that has been done, globally. And so, yes, certainly the stress reduction, is one of the largest. And some of the research, though, around things like improved focus, improved mood, these are all individual studies. It's much harder to measure those things. So it is about, sort of getting through the respective research studies that have been done. And I did recently hear about a compilation of all these studies in one place, and I'm happy to send the site to that around to the group if it's possible to email the group afterwards. Is that an option?
It is absolutely possible. So if you send me those resources, I can send them out to everyone who's registered, so they'll get it.
Great. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, we do have another question. Do you have to be within a forest of trees to forest bathe, or can one be in a quiet park or yard or garden?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are more optimal settings than others, but no, you don't have to be in a forest. I mean, you could be at the beach, right? Amos Clifford has a great story how he did an entire, 2-hour forest bathing program around a single tree in like a Walmart parking lot. So yes, anything that has a little bit of nature in it would allow you to proceed through sort of a sequence of nature connection invitations to achieve, what you're looking for in forest bathing. So let me, I'm going to move along to, some of what I thought could be some helpful thoughts on, if we want to call it DIY tips or just, my recommendations on 4 practices that I think are really helpful to help, form connections, with nature. And the first one is really about cultivating a sense of place, developing a sense of place. And I'm just going to jump to the quote here at the bottom: "People protect what they love," by Jacques Cousteau. And I think as we deepen one's knowledge about your land, the land you live on, that you recreate on, that you walk on, you do develop a love for that place. So I put in the cover of this particular book here by Jack Fagan, because I think it's such a terrific book about the Shawangunk Ridge that we're so fortunate at the preserve to have access to. But the overall point is really about spending time out on the land, getting to know it and being curious about it. This idea or this theory of place blindness is something that we talk a lot about in forest bathing. The idea that so much of our time is spent indoors that we no longer even really notice the land that we live on, that we recreate on. And to be curious about, what's underneath this land, what's above it. I mean, obviously here in the Shawangunks, the rock is the story, right? It's some of the strongest, most durable rock in the world, which is why the ridge is so ideal, right, for rock climbing. But getting to know something about the plants and the trees. I mean, I feel such affection for things like, the pitch pine, particularly out along, the Minnewaska Park area, just the beauty of it there in particular, sort of falling in love with the place. What are the wildlife? What are the people? And we have such a rich history here in the Shawangunk with the Traps Mountain Hamlet. Do we know much about that? To be curious about who were the people before us, before the subsistence communities along the ridge, You know, we had indigenous people in the area. There are rock shelters right on the West Traps Connector path. There's a rock shelter right out there along Lenape Lane. What are the kinds of, you know, wildlife that we see here? The peregrine falcons that come back now every year. I don't think, you know, the goal is to become a naturalist, but the goal is really to form a relationship with your land. So I want to offer that as a personal practice option. Then for me, I feel the next is really this idea of developing a practice of centering oneself. That's a great place to start, because in forest bathing, we really cultivate intentional breathing, and really all else flows from that. You know, we use breath as a tool to sort of help anchor us to the present moment. And you can think of it as this master switch in your head, you know, that allows you to stop thinking about the past or worrying about the future. Because what we want is, you know, to quiet those ripples. So I have this, you know, picture in this case of a wasting lake, you know, thinking that, you know, that constant chatter in our minds is sort of like the ripples on a lake or waves in the ocean. And when our minds are, you know, still and clear, we're able to tap into that vast, you know, the vast, deep, clear water underneath all that chatter. You know, that's where our stillness lies. And that's when we can really open ourselves up to noticing more. So before any forest bathing walk, we'll spend a little bit of time centering ourselves, you know, stilling our mind, so that we sharpen, you know, our senses. We're able to see more. We're able to notice more. Our awareness is greater. And in turn, that really opens us up to experience awe and wonder. So developing a practice of centering is, I think, very crucial. And this doesn't mean, you know, the need to meditate for 15 minutes before you go on a forest bathing walk, but, you know, spending at, you know, 3 to 5 minutes centering is a beautiful practice. You know, the next thought I would offer is around walking with awareness. And I'll jump right to the quote here at the bottom. I have to see it on my screen here. Walk as if you are kissing the earth with your feet, by Thich Nhat Hanh, who is a Buddhist practitioner. And in fact, I consider, as many people do, really the father of mindfulness and mindfulness practices. So what we're doing here when we walk with awareness is we're really slowing down. You know, in fact, instead of even thinking about walking, think about sauntering, maybe. You know, resist that urge to be, you know, taking out your phone to capture every moment. And instead, you know, we're trying to experience the land through our own senses. So we have to go into this with a very specific intention, you know, to awaken our senses. And that's why going slow is really so important. You know, it's slow and it's intentional. There's a theory called sensory anesthesia. And for some of you who may have been on some of my walks, I know you have heard me talk about this, but it's this idea of this diminished use of our senses, this gradual loss of sensory experience because we are so virtual at this point in time. So when we walk with awareness and we're intentionally focused on awakening our senses, we can think about, hiking with our hands, so to speak. For many people, I mentioned before, nature is something that we no longer touch, right? It's more like a museum. But, touching bark, touching snow, hiking with your hands, going barefoot, of course, not in the winter, but on the right trail where it's safe, in the right setting. Those sorts of activities are different than what we experience when we go for a hike. There's a certain intentionality behind this to awaken your senses in a very deliberate way. So then I want to go, just in the interest of time, let me move down to our next. And then we come to this idea of the sit spot. So the sit spot is by far and away the most fundamental part of a forest bathing experience. And it's also one, that is something you can cultivate, obviously, very easily, on your own. Sit spot practice for me is a way to begin to restore our relationship with nature. By simply learning to sit and be, you are developing a strong sensory relationship with the more than human world. There's this theory called species loneliness, which describes this sort of state of isolation and disconnection that produces this sadness in humans because we're estranged from the rest of creation. We're estranged from the more than human world. We've lost this relationship. This phrase, species loneliness, was coined by Robin Wall Kimmerer in her book, Braiding Sweetgrass. And, the sit spot is one way that we begin to rebuild that relationship that was lost. A lot of people believe that species loneliness is directly linked to this sort of skyrocketing statistics around the increased numbers of people suffering from anxiety and depression. I think it's something they estimate like 40 million Americans suffer anxiety disorder. 2.6 million American kids suffer from depression. So by connecting with the more than human world, we're looking to remember those lost relationships and reforge those connections. How long should a sit spot be? How often? I mean, ideally, I think 2 to 3 times a week. I think it's the length, though, that's most important to me. 20 minutes is recommended because that's sort of the amount of time you need for the baseline forest activity to return to its natural state after you sort of, saunter in there and disrupt things, because there's always a certain amount of disruption. But after about 20 minutes, we really do see things are returning to that baseline before, you entered. I also think that 20 minutes is enough for this idea of the slow reveal to happen. The idea that, we're able to notice things that we didn't notice at first. My only thoughts on sit spot that I would add are make it convenient. If it's not convenient, you are not going to do it. If you can't go outside because of physical limitations or because winter or weather, then move your sit spot towards a window in your home. And even, that's good. That's enough, right, to help rebuild that relationship. I think you can use things like journaling if you want during your sit spot practice. That's just something I personally have been doing a little bit more of recently. And I can use a journal maybe to keep some nature observation or some personal observation, or again, just sitting. I am going to share, probably against my better judgment, my journal picture of my sit spot for everyone. It's silly, right? But it's a place I love out in my yard. I'm not an artist, but the idea is to, explore, be curious while you're there, observe, just sit or journal, all sort of quiet nature observation activities. The other thing I might suggest on the sit spot, and I haven't reflected this in any bullet points on the slides, is to consider doing your sit spot at the same time every day. So this is something that I try to do. I think time is something I have struggled with in the past. This idea that time is getting away. I think that culturally, we sort of are obsessed with that notion. There just isn't enough time. I can't get it all done. This idea that time is linear, it's limited, it's irreversible. But nature actually reveals itself in more of a circular pattern, right? In cycles. And that, I think, is a very powerful exercise to bring into your sit spot practice if you have the ability to practice at roughly the same time every day.
Little search. What is MTHW?
Yes, more than human world. Yeah, I think I used the phrase before. It's, the natural environment, be it plants, animals, rocks, rivers, streams. So yes, the sit spot, again, just playing with that idea of how it changes your relationship with time is a very powerful exercise. So those 4 DIY thoughts, are offered to you as what I feel are key building blocks to forest bathing, but on a broader perspective, really the key building blocks to restoring a healthy relationship with the more than human world. And I think it is about restoring the relationship, because we really shouldn't see nature as just another resource that we would take from. It's really about seeing, the interconnectedness of the human and the more than human world. And that developing a relationship with nature really transforms how we relate to a place. Kind of understanding something, unique, or having a love for a particular spot transforms your relationship with that natural environment. And I'll conclude just with just 2 last slides here. But again, going back to Robin Wall Kimmerer, and I know some of you have been on my walks, have heard this quote perhaps from me. It really resonates for me. Knowing that you love the earth changes you, activates you to defend and protect and celebrate. But when you feel that the earth loves you in return, that feeling transforms the relationship into a sacred bond. So as Lauren mentioned at the beginning, we are having an upcoming spring series at Mohawk. It's the first Saturday from 8:30 to 10:30 in the morning. And we'll go to 3 different locations. And I'm really hoping that I might see some of you there and have the pleasure of forest bathing with you. I want to thank everyone for their time tonight, and we could take any further questions.
Yeah, we have a few moments here for some more questions. Yeah, and actually Jane and I just this week were discussing the summer dates, so keep a lookout for those as well. You had a lot of really nice comments about your journal page, so. But you mentioned Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, as did a few of our participants. It is a great book. I highly recommend Braiding Sweetgrass. There are a lot of concepts written in that book that are an awful lot like forest bathing. So if you haven't checked that one out, definitely do. Let's see, and Richard Louv's book, Vitamin N, talks about the health benefits of spending time in nature and cites several studies. Lots of ideas for family to spend time in nature. I know that there's a project, there's an app called 1,000 Hours Outside. My sister's actually doing that one with her 3 kids. So she's going to try and get them outside for 1,000 hours this year. She's doing pretty good so far. Let's see. And I also have the same issue of trying to be mindful while hiking, because I am a photographer as well. So Tony did say it's hard when you're a photographer to stop and not focus on those great shots and just be mindful of where you are. So there's a question here from Roy. What are the benefits of a group forest bathing experience versus the individual experience?
Right. So yeah, I mean, so this, discussion is around ways to develop your own or cultivate your own individual practice. But I do, believe that forest bathing in community is a beautiful exercise, actually. Because if you, because again, that focus on connection and relationship, connection with oneself, with others, and the more than human world is something that we really all comes together when we're in a group. And also the idea that there's a lot of, in the group experience, we do pause for, you could call them sharing circles or council practice, where we, a few times, through the program, share our individual experiences. And we do that because as we share individual experiences, collective wisdom grows. So the sharing circle is just that. It's about deep listening. Someone shares, and that's just received. It's not, a back and forth discussion. And what I do find, though, is that, there is this sort of collective wisdom by the end of it that we've experienced.
Yeah, that just sounds lovely. Let me see. Oh, Maribel says, how did the last quote go? Could you repeat that last quote that you had? I think in the presentation is what it's referring to. There it is.
Yeah, so I put it back on the screen. Knowing that you love the earth changes you, activates you to defend and protect and celebrate. But when you feel the earth loves you in return, that feeling transforms the relationship into a sacred bond.
Yes, and Robin Wall Kimmerer again, who is the author of Braiding Sweetgrass. Yes, she's also my botany professor, so she's an awesome lady. So yeah, and her book, again, highly recommend that. Let's see, I think that is pretty much it. It's a lot of comments about walking barefoot, several favorite trees to visit on the walks, barefoot walking. Yeah, and you're just getting a lot of thanks for having a wonderful program. Yeah, this has actually been really wonderful this evening, Jane. Thank you so much for giving this presentation. And as was mentioned, in just a couple weekends, the first of the Spring Forest Bathing Series will be happening out at Spring Farm to start off with. And yeah, you can registration's open for those right now. So you can do that. We have other programs that are coming up this March as well. We're going to do Kids Day in the Sugar Bush, also at Spring Farm. We have another webinar coming up on wayfinding with Ed Pestone, and one of our rangers are going to give a talk about signage and finding your way in the woods. I mean, that really is, I'm fascinated by this one. So that's also coming up in March. And then in the spring, later in the spring, in April, we have another presentation by Bill Bakaitis. He's going to do one on morels. So if you haven't signed up for that webinar, you might want to do that. He's, I know morels are a popular topic for everyone. And so, so sign up for that. And our future programming, of course, look for more programming as far as webinars, and our in-person programming. Spots are limited for the in-person, just due to the times. So get quick and sign up for these. Again, thank you, Jane, and thank you everyone for coming this evening. This has been recorded and it will be posted as soon as we can get it up there. And thank you to anyone who did do a donation to our Environmental Education Scholarship Fund. That is very helpful. During these times, it's going to get a lot of schools coming out to us that normally wouldn't be able to come out and have our outreach programs as well. And Jane, you're going to get me some of those resources that you had mentioned.
Yep, and I'll also include a couple of books.
Awesome. Okay, so I will send those out to everyone who is registered this evening. So look for an email coming soon from myself, Mohonk Preserve, and we'll get you all of that wonderful information out.
Great. All right, thanks everybody.
Yes, thank you everybody. Have a lovely rest of your evening.